in the heart of Paris, nestled between five-star hotels and haute cuisine cafes, there was a boutique so exclusive that even wealth whispered before entering. Eloise Paris wasn't just a boutique, it was a cathedral of fashion, sanctified only for the ultra-elite. From the moment you stepped through the glass doors, everything screamed perfection. The scent of exotic wood and leather, the hush of classical jazz echoing from hidden speakers, and the ever-watchful eyes of Helena, the manager and gatekeeper of this temple of opulence. But today the air felt different. A soft chime rang as the door opened, and in walked a woman who didn't fit the scene. Loose gray sweatpants, a white hoodie, dark sunglasses, and a black baseball cap. She wasn't here to impress. She strolled, fingers gently brushing the silk and lace as if they were nothing more than supermarket produce. Helena noticed immediately, like a predator scenting something off in her territory. She moved in, her heels clicking with silent authority. She didn't need to ask who this woman was. She already knew who she wasn't. Not a client, not a socialite, just another dreamer with no business in a place like this. But Helena didn't realize who she was really dealing with. The woman was Sandra Bullock. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories like this intrigue you, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss tomorrow's tale. It's even more powerful than this one. Sandra browsed the racks with curiosity, occasionally lifting a price tag but never flinching. Helena followed her movements, trying not to show her disdain. She finally spoke, her voice sweet as syrup, but twice as toxic. "May I help you, madam?" she asked with a smile that meant the opposite. Sandra looked up. "No thank you. Just browsing." Helena's smile twitched. "Just so you know, everything here is bespoke, not for everyone." The implication hung in the air. Sandra didn't react, but her fingers gripped a silk black dress, a limited piece known among Parisian elites. Helena's blood pressure spiked, and then it began. The subtle humiliation, the veiled comments, the performance. But Sandra didn't leave. Not yet. She was going to let this story unfold, and Helena would never forget it. Sandra held the dress with a calm grace, her fingertips appreciating its fabric, like a connoisseur sampling fine wine. Helena couldn't take it anymore. This woman, dressed like a backpacker lost in Saint-Germain, dared to lay hands on a garment meant for royalty. No, Helena had to act, now. "I just meant," Helena added, circling Sandra with a curated politeness, "that this piece requires a certain elegance, posture, and of course the right accessories." Her eyes scanned Sandra's hoodie with surgical precision, then lingered on the cap shielding her face. She let out a soft, almost imperceptible chuckle. "There are other items that would be more appropriate for your profile." Sandra turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. "And what exactly is my profile?" Helena's eyes didn't flinch. "Well, this boutique caters to clients who understand fashion, the kind who don't need help appreciating a piece like this." Sandra's lips curled into a smile. "Not the warm kind. This one had teeth." "You think I don't understand?" Helena shrugged slightly. "Some people mistake Eloise Paris for an ordinary store." Sandra tilted her head. "And you believe I shouldn't be here?" Helena's answer was subtle, but brutal. "Some of our regular clients might feel uncomfortable." The message was clear. "You don't belong." Sandra looked around, noticing two women whispering while sipping champagne. She sighed. "Interesting," she said, her tone sharpened. "Because when I walked in, no one offered me a glass of champagne." The words dropped like a bomb. The air froze. Sales assistants glanced at each other. The VIPs stopped mid-sip. Everyone in that boutique knew champagne was reserved for important clients. Sandra Bullock, who still hadn't revealed her identity, had received nothing. Helena's smile cracked. "Oh, that must have been a mistake. I'll bring one immediately." "No need," Sandra said, her voice calm and dagger sharp. "I've already seen everything I needed to see." Then she turned to Clara, the young assistant who had stood silently, watching the drama unfold. "What do you think?" Sandra asked, holding up the dress. "Would this look good on me?" Clara's heart pounded. She glanced nervously at Helena, who narrowed her eyes like a mother wolf about to strike. but Clara took a deep breath and nodded. Yes, it would look incredible. Helena felt the world shift beneath her feet. For the first time she realized she wasn't in control anymore, but she couldn't let go that easily. She stepped forward, her voice laced with venom. "Let me have it prepared in your size," she said. "Clara, take this to the fitting room." Clara hesitated. "And make sure we find a size that fits properly." The jab wasn't subtle, it was meant to humiliate. Sandra exhaled slowly, her eyes locked on Helena like lasers. She walked to the counter, dress still draped on her arm, and said with devastating calm, "I'll take it." Helena laughed. "Really?" Sandra nodded. Then she took off her sunglasses, and the boutique fell into a stunned silence, because now everyone recognized her. Sandra Bullock, Hollywood royalty, and Helena had made the mistake of her life. Gasps rippled through the boutique like waves after an explosion. A VIP client clutched her pearls. Another whispered to her friend, "That's Sandra Bullock." Her name fell like thunder, echoing off the marble walls. Helena's mouth hung slightly open, her tongue too heavy to form excuses. Her skin turned ghostly pale. She had just spent the last 20 minutes trying to belittle one of the most respected actresses in the world, and now the mask had come off. But the performance wasn't over. The boutique door chimed again. Everyone and what happened next would be remembered in every whispered conversation across Paris's fashion scene for years. Keanu Reeves walked in, effortlessly elegant in a black coat and dark jeans. His presence commanded the room like a king entering his throne hall. His gaze swept the boutique once and went straight to Sandra. He didn't pause, didn't glance at the shocked crowd, didn't nod at the stunned Helena. He walked to Sandra, and without a word embraced her. A real embrace, the kind that silences time. Sandra smiled, whispering, "It's been too long." Keanu stepped back, his eyes glinting with subtle amusement. "Far too long, Bullock." Then he turned, locking eyes with Helena. She froze. His stare wasn't angry. It didn't need to. It carried a quiet fury, the kind that doesn't scream, but slices with surgical precision. "I hope they treated you well," he said, irony dripping from every syllable. It was a question that didn't need an answer. Everyone already knew the truth. Sandra let out a soft laugh. "Oh yes," she said, locking eyes with Helena. They were unforgettable. The boutique trembled in silence. Before we continue with what Keanu did next and how this story flips again, if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal the truth behind appearances. Comment below, have you ever been underestimated? Your story matters, and it might be the next one we share. Helena tried to speak. She opened her mouth, but her voice betrayed her. "Miss Bullock, I didn't know who you were." Sandra crossed her arms. "And that should justify what?" Helena stuttered. "It was a misunderstanding." Keanu stepped in. "A misunderstanding." His voice was calm, but the boutique felt it like an earthquake. Because she wore a hoodie, Helena's knees wobbled. "I wanted to protect the exclusivity of our experience." Sandra chuckled. "So now you get to decide who deserves respect." Helena had no answer. Then one of the VIP clients, an impeccably dressed woman with diamonds dripping from her wrist, stood and spoke with quiet defiance. "If this is how you treat Sandra Bullock, imagine how you treat the rest of us." Her words shattered Helena's composure, and the real fall was just beginning. The boutique froze. The blonde VIP client turned to the sales assistant beside her. "I'm not spending a cent in a place that humiliates its guests." She picked up her designer handbag, gave Helena one final look of disdain, and walked out. The sound of the glass doors closing behind her echoed like a verdict. Helena tried to keep her composure, but her throat felt like it was closing. Her authority, the control she wore like an accessory, was slipping with every second. Another client rose, then another. Each gave Sandra a respectful nod, and each avoided Helena's gaze as if she had become a leper. The boutique, once a sanctuary of status, was now turning into a courtroom, and Helena stood alone at the center. Helena's phone vibrated in her pocket. With trembling fingers, she glanced at the screen. A message from the boutique owner. "Helena, we have a serious problem. Call me immediately." Her chest tightened. Panic clawed at her throat. She looked around for some hint of rescue, but the judgment in the eyes around her was absolute. Then came the final blow. Clara, the young assistant, who had stood silently for most of the ordeal, took a deep breath. She walked to the counter, reached up and removed her name tag. "I can't work here anymore," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. Helena's mouth fell open. "Clara, please," she whispered, but there was no strength behind it. The name felt foreign on her tongue now, powerless. Clara didn't even look at her. She turned to Sandra and Keanu and said something that no one expected. "May I walk you both out?" Sandra gave her a warm smile. "Of course." Helena watched as the trio headed for the exit. She tried to will herself to speak, to stop them, to reclaim the narrative. But there was no narrative left. She had lost the plot. She had lost everything. The doors opened again. This time they didn't just signal a departure. They signaled the end. The end of Helena's reign. The end of her illusion of power. The end of her carefully curated superiority. And the beginning of her public downfall. The boutique emptied. One client after another. Sales assistants whispered among themselves. No one looked her in the eye. Helena stood still, the silence around her now deafening. And in the distance, through the glass, Sandra Bullock walked away, not just as a customer, but as a symbol. A reminder that dignity isn't worn, it's lived. Across the city, at a cozy Parisian cafe far removed from the stiff luxury of Eloise, Sandra, Keanu and Clara sat at a small table near the window. The contrast was striking. No chandeliers, no velvet ropes, just soft morning light, laughter and the comforting clink of coffee cups. Clara still looked stunned, as if she hadn't yet processed everything that had happened. Her name tag, now resting in her coat pocket, felt heavier than ever. She stirred her cappuccino absent-mindedly. Sandra watched her gently. "What's next for you, Clara?" Clara shrugged. "I don't know. I just couldn't stay there anymore. Not after what she did. Not after what I saw." Keanu leaned back, arms folded loosely. "Sometimes it takes courage to walk away, but that's when things start changing." Clara gave a small smile. "I just want to be somewhere I can grow, where kindness isn't treated like weakness." Keanu exchanged a glance with Sandra, then smiled. "Turns out we know a few people who could help with that." Clara blinked. "Really?" Sandra nodded. "We like helping people who deserve it. And after today, you've earned more than just a fresh start." Clara looked down, emotional. "Thank you." Just then Sandra's phone vibrated. She checked the message, and her eyes widened slightly, before she handed the phone to Keanu, with a small smirk. He read it and chuckled. "The boutique manager has been officially fired," he said, reading aloud. "And the video has over 20 million views." Clara's jaw dropped. "It was filmed." Sandra nodded. "Of course it was. Someone always records everything in places like that. It's already everywhere." Keanu grinned. "I'm guessing Helena didn't see that plot twist coming." Sandra sipped her espresso, her voice low and steady. "Some people think luxury is power, but real power," she looked Clara in the eyes, "is knowing how to treat people with respect." And across the city, in a cold and silent apartment, Helena sat alone. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Notifications, emails, headlines, missed calls from the boutique owner. Her kingdom had collapsed in a matter of hours. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. Status is temporary, but the world's judgment is swift, and sometimes immortal. And dignity, that never goes out of fashion. Helena sat on the edge of her designer sofa, once proud and pristine, now feeling like a mockery of everything she'd built her identity on. The news was everywhere. Headlines screamed across every social feed. Boutique manager humiliates Sandra Bullock. Keanu Reeves steps in with class. Luxury store scandal. Hollywood icons versus arrogant gatekeeper. Clerk quits in solidarity after Bullock snub. Public applauds her courage. Every ping from her phone was a fresh wound. Her name, once respected in elite retail circles, was now a trending tag for all the wrong reasons. Her inbox overflowed with messages from former clients, contacts, even a few influencers she once dismissed, all asking the same thing. "How could you treat someone like that? Did you really not recognize her? Are you insane?" She rubbed her temples, breathing shallowly. Just hours ago, she was the queen of Eloise Paris. Now she was the cautionary tale of the internet. And the worst part, she didn't lose her position because Sandra was famous. She lost it because she forgot the simplest rule. Everyone deserves respect. Meanwhile at the cafe, Sandra stood to leave. Clara did too, unsure if the magic of this moment would carry into the future. But Keanu turned to her and said, "We'll be in touch. You're exactly the kind of person the world needs more of." Clara bit her lip to stop the tears. "Thank you for seeing me." Sandra smiled warmly. "No, Clara, thank you for standing up. That takes more strength than most people have." They embraced, and Clara watched as the two stars walked off into the Paris afternoon. Two people who wore their fame not as armor but as a responsibility. Later that evening, Sandra opened her phone and read a message from a producer friend. "That boutique story, it's going viral. People love you for how you handled it, but the real star, that assistant, Clara." Sandra smiled and typed back, "Good, the world needs to know her name." Because in a world obsessed with appearances, kindness still shines through like gold. And in that boutique, now nearly empty, Helena faced a truth more painful than any headline. Power without humility is just decoration. But character is eternal. The next morning a new headline began trending. Ex-boutique clerk offered job after viral scandal. Sandra and Keanu help her start again. Clara woke up to hundreds of messages, missed calls and one surprising email that made her sit up straight. From Warner Brothers H. Subject: "Let's talk." She blinked, rereading it. At the bottom of the message, a handwritten note was scanned and attached. It was signed by Sandra herself. "There's a place for people like you in our world. Let us help you find it." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Just yesterday she had been invisible, another nameless assistant trying to survive under Helena's impossible standards. Today she had value, not because of her resume, but because of her principles. Across the city, the boutique stood eerily quiet. The store's social media pages had turned off comments. A note on the door read, "Closed for renovations," but everyone knew it wasn't the walls being repainted. It was the brand trying to repaint its reputation. Inside, Helena no longer walked with heels that clicked with authority. She walked in silence, gathering her things under the watchful eyes of the new regional manager, sent directly from the brand's headquarters. "We're sorry, Helena," he said, with the cold detachment of someone who'd seen too many scandals, "but this is beyond recovery. You've become a liability." "No one gave me a chance to explain," Helena murmured. The man glanced up from his clipboard. 25 million views say otherwise. And just like that, she was escorted out. Not with a crowd, not with applause, but with silence. No farewell parties, no legacy. Nothing. Back at the cafe where it had all shifted, Keanu and Sandra sat once more, enjoying the morning sun. A couple passing by recognized them but didn't approach. Something about their posture, their serenity, made it feel like a sacred moment. Sandra looked at Keanu, thoughtful. "You know, sometimes I think we were meant to be in that boutique at the same time." Keanu smiled. "Fate has excellent timing." "And Helena, she learned," he said, sipping his coffee. "The world made sure of it." Sandra nodded. "But Clara, she's the one who really changed everything." Because this story had never been about a dress or even a mistake. It was about courage in the quiet moments. As the day passed, Clara's story reached every corner of social media. Influencers posted reaction videos. Journalists requested interviews. Comment sections overflowed with support. "Clara is the hero we didn't know we needed. Justice served, kindness finally wins. More people like Clara, please." Sandra's team helped her connect with a women-led fashion startup, based in New York. Within 48 hours, Clara was flown out for an in-person interview. Not only did they offer her a full-time position, but they asked her to help develop a customer experience program based on empathy, elegance and respect. Clara accepted, her voice still shaking with disbelief, but her eyes shone with a newfound clarity. She wasn't just moving on, she was rising. Meanwhile, Helena tried to repair her image. She called contacts, begged PR firms to take her on, even tried to publish a clarifying statement. But the internet didn't forget. A viral clip of Keanu's line, "I hope they treated you well," had become a trending sound on TikTok, used in videos about dignity, revenge and poetic justice. One creator captioned it, "When they underestimate you, and karma walks in wearing a black coat." By the end of the week, Helena's name was synonymous with the dangers of judging too quickly. Her designer mask had fallen, and the world saw her not as polished, but pet. One news outlet summed it up best. Helena lost her crown the moment she forgot that kindness costs nothing, and dignity is priceless. Back in New York, Sandra received a call from Clara. "I got the job," she said, voice trembling with joy. "They said they want to build something new, something better." Sandra smiled. "Good. That's what the world needs. Not more luxury, more integrity." And far from the lights of Paris, in a quiet office with exposed brick and natural light, Clara sat at a new desk. Not as an assistant, but as a leader. She pinned a quote beside her screen, something Keanu had said that afternoon in the cafe. "Real power is using your voice when no one else dares to speak." And from that moment on, Clara did just. Weeks later, the boutique where it all began reopened, this time under new management, a full rebranding campaign, and a carefully choreographed PR effort, meant to bury the scandal. But something had changed forever. The glamour once used to intimidate now carried a faint shadow. The judgment that used to control the room now reminded customers of how fragile appearances really are. Customers returned, yes, but cautiously, and many of the VIP clients who had once boasted about shopping at Eloise now preferred to be seen elsewhere. Meanwhile, Clara's journey bloomed like spring after a bitter winter. In her first week at the startup, she presented a proposal titled, "The Human Touch." It was a bold move, but it stunned the executive board. She spoke from experience, from pain, and from conviction. "We need to stop assuming customers owe us reverence," Clara said in her presentation. "The new luxury is humility." The room was silent for a beat, then filled with applause. Word spread quickly. A young woman once humiliated by a manager drunk on power, was now shaping the philosophy of one of the fastest growing ethical fashion brands in the world. Keanu sent her a handwritten note with a small bouquet of lavender. "They tried to silence you. You spoke anyway. You belong in every room you enter." She kept the card in her drawer. Sandra invited Clara to join her at a charity gala, not just as a guest, but as a collaborator. Together they announced a new mentorship program for young women in fashion and retail, focusing on ethics, voice and visibility. The audience gave them a standing ovation. The press covered it as a redemption story, but the truth was more powerful than that. Clara didn't just recover from humiliation, she transformed it. Helena, now invisible to the fashion world she once ruled, watched it all unfold from afar. Every headline, every article, every image of Clara standing tall next to Hollywood royalty, felt like a page torn from the life she thought she deserved. But she never understood. It was never about deserving status. It was always about deserving people. A month passed, and Clara's name was now being spoken in rooms that had never even acknowledged her existence before. Fashion editors referenced her as the voice of the new luxury. A documentary team reached out, wanting to include her in a series on modern heroes of integrity. And brands, big ones, started requesting meetings. But she never forgot the boutique. She never forgot the humiliation. And she never forgot the moment she decided to speak. One evening Sandra called her from "There's a panel next month," she said, "on women in power. About knowing when to speak up. I want you beside me on that stage." Clara hesitated. "Me?" Sandra's tone was warm, firm. "You didn't just walk away from injustice, Clara. You changed the story. Most people stay silent. You didn't." She accepted. On the day of the panel, the auditorium was packed. Cameras rolled. Influencers, editors, CEOs, all sat quietly as Sandra Bullock introduced Clara, not as the assistant, but as the voice that reminded us all who the real client is. The human being. Clara stood on stage, hands shaking slightly, and spoke her truth. "I used to think the most important thing in a luxury boutique was knowing the product. Now I know it's knowing how to treat people, because all the fashion in the world can't cover a lack of humanity." A long thunderous applause followed. From the back of the room Keanu watched silently, nodding. That night Clara received hundreds of messages, some from strangers, some from past colleagues, and one from a former boutique customer she barely remembered. It read, "I once saw you helping an older woman who didn't speak French. You smiled at her when Helena rolled her eyes. I never said anything, but I remember that.
and I never forgot how much it meant. Thank you. She stared at that message for a long time. Because it wasn't about the dress. It never had been. It was about the power of a single moment. The courage to say, this isn't right, and to choose empathy over silence. And now she wasn't just remembered. She was rewriting what luxury meant. Back in Paris, the old boutique had changed name. The rebranding campaign came with new colors, a fresh logo, and a hollow promise of transformation. But the locals knew better. They remembered. The story of what happened inside those doors had become legend. A modern parable about arrogance, recognition, and the quiet fury of justice. Tourists still took photos outside the boutique, whispering, "That's where it happened." And though Helena was no longer there, her shadow still lingered in every corner of the store's history. Helena, now unemployed and largely blacklisted, had moved out of the city center. She tried to apply at other boutiques, but the references never went far. The fashion world was small, and her name, once a badge of exclusivity, was now a cautionary tale. In an online forum, someone asked, "Whatever happened to that manager who insulted Sandra Bullock?" The top reply simply said, "She forgot that grace is never out of style." Meanwhile, Clara's life kept rising. She launched a digital series titled The Customer Chair, where she interviewed clients, former retail workers, and industry leaders about the human experience behind luxury. Each episode ended with the same line: "Luxury means nothing if it lacks dignity." The series went viral. One afternoon, Clara received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a thank you card. It read, "You reminded us that class doesn't come from a brand, it comes from the heart. Keep going. SB." It had no logo, no stamp of celebrity, just the initials. Clara placed it next to Keanu's card in her drawer, the same one where her old name tag now rested, a small silent trophy from the day her life changed. And in that drawer, three symbols now lived together: her past, her courage, her legacy, and all of them pointed to the same truth. Sometimes all it takes to change the world is to treat someone like they matter. 2 years later, the gala stage was set in Los Angeles for an awards ceremony unlike any other, one that celebrated acts of quiet heroism in everyday life. It was streamed globally, hosted by a foundation Sandra and Keanu had quietly launched together. Grace in action. The audience was filled with artists, leaders, humanitarians, and Clara. She sat among them, wearing an elegant black dress designed by a young woman from the mentorship program she had helped build. Her presence radiated not opulence but substance. The room didn't applaud for her clothes, it applauded for her courage. Sandra stepped onto the stage, smiling at the crowd. Tonight's honoree reminded the world of something we too often forget in places obsessed with image and status. She began, "That kindness is not a weakness. That silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It's complicity." She gestured toward Clara in the audience, "And that sometimes changing the world begins with 4 words. This isn't right." Clara rose, eyes glistening as the room stood with her in thunderous applause. She accepted the award with humility, and her words, like always, were simple but sharp. "I was never looking for a moment like this. I just wanted to do what was right, even if it meant losing everything. But instead I gained what I never expected: purpose." The lights dimmed. A video played of that day in the boutique. Grainy phone footage showing Helena's smirk, Sandra's quiet strength, and Clara's stand. The room watched in silence. When the lights came back up, no one saw Sandra Bullock or Keanu Reeves as actors anymore. They saw them as allies. And they saw Clara, not as a viral moment, but as a movement. Outside the gala, press swarmed, flashing cameras and calling out names. But Clara didn't seek the spotlight. She stood beside Sandra and Keanu, the three of them sharing a quiet moment before slipping into a car waiting at the curb. As they drove off, Clara glanced back at the photographers and murmured, "Funny how one moment can echo for a lifetime." Sandra smiled. "That's the thing about grace. It never fades."
Weeks after the gala, an editorial appeared in Vogue's global edition. The title was bold, simple, and unforgettable: "The Assistant Who Changed the Meaning of Luxury." The piece chronicled Clara's journey from silence to spotlight, not as a Cinderella tale, but as a case study in integrity. Her quotes were stitched between paragraphs of insight from top designers, sociologists, and cultural critics, all converging on the same idea. The era of status-based elitism was crumbling, and Clara had struck the first blow. In Paris, a small group of boutique workers met for coffee. One of them, barely older than 22, said, "I used to be afraid to speak up. But after what Clara did, I don't know. It just feels like we have permission now." At the table, someone else added, "She reminded us we're not background noise in this industry. We are the story too." That quiet ripple, born from one woman daring to stand between cruelty and silence, was now reshaping the culture of an entire sector. And Helena? Her name no longer trended. She no longer made headlines. Her silence had become complete, not imposed by a company, but by irrelevance. She had built a world on the illusion of control, only to be undone by one truth: respect isn't earned through hierarchy. It's revealed in how you treat the people you think you'll never need. Back in New York, Clara opened her laptop and began outlining her next project. A book. Its title came to her effortlessly, as if whispered by the very moment that had transformed everything. What they didn't see. As she typed the first chapter, she smiled. Because she knew this story didn't end with a scandal or a viral video. It ended with a message, a reminder etched into the fabric of modern culture, that true elegance begins where ego ends. And sometimes, the greatest red carpet a person will ever walk is the one they create for someone else.